Well, good afternoon to all. My name is ODeSchutter. I am the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, appointed to this position by the Human Rights Council in 2008. And it is my great pleasure to salute this 25th anniversary of the Spanish International Cooperation Development Agency, AECID, and to congratulate the agency for the very important work it has been doing on the right to food over the years. I'm now entering the final phase of my mandate as Special Rapporteur on the right to food, and I think it would be useful perhaps for me to sum up what we have learned and where the consensus today is about why the right to food is useful and what are the next priorities in improving food security, in combating hunger and malnutrition. Let me perhaps first of all note that we have been witnessing over the past 5-6 years a major revolution in how we should eradicate hunger and malnutrition. In the past, the idea was a very simple one, that we should increase production by encouraging the most efficient producers and the most efficient regions to boost production, and for those regions and producers to feed the others. The regions who would be food deficit regions would benefit from trade and aid in order to allow them to satisfy their food needs, but by trade liberalization and by encouraging the competition between farmers, it would be possible to raise output by the most competitive producers for all the world. And this approach that has been characteristic of much of the 20th century has now shown to present many limitations. Today, the consensus is rather that we should support all countries' efforts in increasing local food production, in supporting their own farmers, to reduce dependency on food imports from international markets, but also to reduce rural poverty by investing in the poor farmers, in those who work on the most marginal environments and who often practice small-scale farming in very difficult conditions. And to a large extent, the reason why rural poverty has not been reduced as much as it could have been is because we've neglected to invest in those small farmers, in that type of family agriculture where the quickest gains could be achieved in the reduction of rural poverty. So instead of encouraging efficiency, large-scale and food surplus regions feeding food deficit regions, today the emphasis is on deconcentrating food production and in encouraging each country, each region to feed itself and to have the ability and the support to do so. That was the first revolution we've witnessed. There was a second revolution, which is a consequence, if you wish, of the first, that we needed, and that is the new approach, we need today to support more local food systems. In the past, most investments, most efforts went into strengthening export-led agriculture. Infrastructures were geared towards supporting the producers who had the best chances of competing well on international markets, and the emphasis was on supplying global markets with cheap foodstuffs. As a result, small-scale local food systems have been underdeveloped, and in many cases, small farmers had no access even to their own local regional markets. So we need to reinvest in rebuilding these local and regional markets by better connecting small farmers to the urban consumers and by rebuilding these connections between the rural areas and the urban areas that often have been neglected in the past approaches to development. This is a way both to provide access and thus incomes to small farmers, for whom local markets are much more accessible than large markets and global supply chains. But it's also a way to allow poor consumers in the urban areas to benefit from nutritious, fresh foods rather than having to depend on foods that have a long shelf life and that are sold in supermarkets under conditions in which food is very heavily transformed, processed, and is often less adequate for healthy diets. So that's a second revolution that took place, a shift from supplying global markets with commodities that would be convenient inputs for the food processing industry to a situation in which we put emphasis now on producing fresh foods, serving local markets in shorter food chains. There's been a third revolution, and that revolution concerns essentially how to make this transition towards helping each country and region to feed itself, towards rebuilding local food systems, given that the mainstream, the dominant food system is so inert and so difficult to displace as a result of a number of lock-ins that make it extremely difficult to change. These lock-ins are well known. There are socio-technical lock-ins, the infrastructures that have been built, the storage facilities that have been built, the processing facilities that have been built, the communication routes that have been built have generally served large-scale producers, the agro-industry, rather than these facilities having connected small farmers to markets. So these technologies that have been developed, these infrastructures that have been developed developed by and for the agri-food industry rather than for these farmers, the poor, the small farmers that have been neglected in the past. We have also socio-economic lock-ins in that the system as it has developed has seen the birth of very large agri-food companies who have been very effective in developing logistical means to connect producers with faraway consumers. These companies are extremely efficient at producing food at low prices for large populations and at increasing volumes of production. As a result, they are highly competitive, and their dominant position leads to further dominance as small farmers are driven out of business because of this competition that they face. So this socio-economic obstacle is a second obstacle that must be addressed. A third obstacle is what might be called a social-cultural obstacle, and that concerns the tastes of consumers, the habits of families, the lifestyles that we've developed. We like food that is processed, that is easy to prepare, that tastes good, and we've become addicted to food that is heavily processed, but also as a result quite heavy in saturated fats, in sugars and salt, and that is not necessarily the best for adequate healthy diets. But that too has been one major obstacle to change in recent years, the habits of consumers and the difficulty to shift to more sustainable diets because of the tastes that consumers have developed in the past. There's a fourth lock-in, a fourth obstacle that I would like to call social-political, and that is the very dominant position that some actors have come to occupy in the mainstream food system, allowing these actors to basically veto any significant change in the system and making it difficult to overcome the obstacle that they constitute for a transition towards sustainable food systems. So how to overcome these lock-ins, how to circumvent these obstacles, how to make a transition towards food systems that are more resilient, that are better for health, that support small farmers so that rural poverty can decrease and local food systems re-emerge despite these food systems having been neglected in the past 30 or 40 years? Well, the answer, in my view, is food democracy. The answer is to allow citizens, consumers, to share with producers, to share with retailers, to share with public authorities a space in which new food systems can be imagined and built from the bottom up. And I'm very encouraged over the past 5 or 6 years to see how many local initiatives have developed that seek to create connections between these different actors to rebuild local food systems and to circumvent these obstacles in making a change in the dominant food system. This is extremely encouraging to see how many alternatives have emerged and how food democracy has been making progress by more political space being given to consumers to link up with producers, with retailers, and with agri-food companies in order to imagine other alternative food systems. Food democracy is very key, and this is why the right to food is important. AECID has been supporting many movements that support the right to food, many initiatives that seek to realize the right to food, and it has been especially key in this major effort to strengthen accountability in food systems that was developed in Latin America under the name of the Iniciativa Latinoamérica y Caribe Sin Hambre, that was developed in a number of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean region to encourage parliamentarians and governments to move towards increasing accountability, participation, non-discrimination in the food systems. This very important initiative, in which the regional office of the FAO in Santiago de Chile played a major role, has been extremely important in encouraging Latin American countries to really take the lead in developing national strategies for the realization of the right to food, framework laws that encourage civil society organizations to work with all actors of the food chain and with the governments to strengthen access to food for poor populations. Why is this important? It's important for essentially 3 reasons. First, the right to food, as it is conceived and developed by national strategies and by framework laws, is there to encourage participation, ensuring that the decisions that will be made by governments as to how to invest, as to whom to support, as to how to protect poor consumers from the impacts of high prices, for example, that these decisions will be made with information provided by the representatives of the poorest segments of the population. In other terms, we cannot support the poor without the poor, and the right to food requires that we involve the poor in shaping decisions that will affect them and that is of importance to them. So this is one major contribution of the right to food. It is to encourage this participation, which is not only a source of legitimacy, it is also a source of effectiveness, because the decisions will be better informed by the views of the poor. Secondly, the right to food means greater accountability. For many years, governments were not held accountable for their choices in agricultural and food policies. As a result, they were very often dominated by major lobbies and large, powerful companies dominating the sector, without them having to justify the choices they make in the light of the needs of the poorest segments of the population. So if the right to food means greater accountability, it would mean decisions that are better suited to meet the needs of the poor, and it will mean governments that will more transparently make decisions and better use the resources at their disposal to improve the situation of the poor. Thirdly, the right to food, beyond participation and accountability, means non-discrimination. It means that all people, all women, men, children, should have the same right to support if they are under the same conditions, without discrimination based on ethnicity, based on political affiliation or political loyalty, without discrimination based on family ties or on other forms of other types of criteria. In many countries in which I traveled, I noted that the farmers that were best supported were the farmers with the best connections to the administration, farmers that were nearby the urban centers and could more easily have access to support, or the elites that could benefit very often disproportionately from the various support schemes that the state had put in place. This, of course, is not correct. It is the poor who should be targeted by the efforts of the government, but this requires that a strong requirement of non-discrimination be imposed in all agricultural and food policies. And the right to food is about this. It's about accountability, participation, and non-discrimination being at the center of the agricultural and food policies that are developed by governments. So these are, in my view, some of the major achievements that we've seen over the past 5 or 6 years. You see, the food systems have changed much more since 2008 than they've been changing over the previous 25 or 30 years. This is a time of revolutions. It is a time of significant rethinking about how we should invest in agriculture and food systems, how we should support access to food for the poor, and how we should make the connections between agricultural production on the one hand and other issues such as public health, such as rural development, such as the preservation of the ecosystems and environmental concerns that in the past were considered apart from how agricultural development should proceed. And today we need a much more holistic approach based on the right to food, based on recognizing the needs of the poorest, and this is, to a large extent, what the programs of AECID have contributed to, particularly, I must say, in Latin America, where its presence has been extraordinarily effective in making this revolution happen in Latin America. Latin America, as I noted in a report I presented to the General Assembly of the United Nations at its 68th session in October 2013, Latin America has been really leading the world in showing how the right to food could make a significant difference in improving access to food for the poor segments of the population. And the Spanish International Development Cooperation Agency, AECID, has been playing a very important role in getting this message across and in providing support for this revolution to take place. So for this, I'm extremely grateful. I, of course, regret that I'm not able to join you in Bolivia for this very important anniversary meeting that was convened by AECID. I'm extremely indebted to AECID for its support over the years. I hope that the debates will be fruitful. I have no doubt that they shall be useful in identifying the challenges ahead. Let me again thank you for allowing me to participate, albeit virtually, in this discussion, and I look forward to our future collaboration. Thank you.